one evening, quite late, my college-aged brother called my parents from jail. It was the 1980s, and he was part of a protest against our U.S. military involvement in Central America. This is a little complicated. At a time when we were illegally funding the Contra rebels in Nicaragua with the secret sales of arms to Iran. It's old, but it's kind of current, I mean, it's the same kind of messy stuff our government can get involved in. There's a picture of my brother Brad. He's wielding a bullhorn. It's on the front page of his newspaper at school, the LSU Reveille, I believe it was called. He was arrested for a sit-in at a congressional office, and our parents needed to get bail money to him. I called up a friend of his to find out if I could get more info on this, and he said, yeah, Brad was terribly uncomfortable in that jail cell for a few hours, and then he got the bail money. He got out. It was fine. He was in trouble. It was that kind of trouble that the recently deceased Representative John Lewis encouraged folks toward. Get in good trouble, he urged. Recently, my husband, Bruce, said to me, I know I'm trouble. Oh, different kind of trouble. Yeah, it was after I picked up something he dropped. Now, he has pretty severe arthritis. He's not flexible enough to retrieve whatever it is that falls through his hands, which is often. Oh, he has tools. He has many different kinds of tools, but it turns out that whatever I can do is a whole lot faster than what he can do with his very special tools for getting all that mess cleaned up. So I like to be there to try to help. He is trouble. Not exactly bad trouble or good trouble, but not a trouble that I mind. And I bet you've been there, Perhaps there's been trouble for you with a spouse, a child, your parents, some friends. I mean, who hasn't had that experience of somebody else being trouble for them? And if we're honest with ourselves, we know we have been trouble for other people as well. Years ago, Tom Brokaw helped to popularize a naming of that generation of people who fought in World War II. He called them the greatest generation, wrote a book, and they were the youth of that time. I recently saw a new book has come out. Instead of the greatest generation, it's called The Wounded Generation. It's by a historian, and his name is David Nassau, and he's countering that narrative, and he says, yes, okay, they were heroic, but also they were badly hurt, and they showed it. They were sometimes silent and sometimes horrible. They had not only the troubles of that war, don't just sit there with that World War II. If you know how history goes, they were the children of the Depression. This was the generation who knew deprivation and violence, who knew suffering and sadness. They had all kinds of different troubles going on, whether they fought directly in the trauma of that war, or, as we know with war, experienced it in any number of ways that war comes at us. They had been traumatized. They had lives of so many troubles, from which some did not recover, ever. And some, it took a long time to recover. And some managed, because we were all different. We have all different ways of dealing with troubles. When that wounded, or greatest, generation had children of their own, and yes, I am one of those kids. Anybody else out there are a child of the greatest generation? Yes. Many of those parents were distant. And those children were this generation who were renowned for rejecting the values of their elders. Oh, that made some more troubles for them, right? And then they were that first generation to experience the twin medical tsunamis of the 20th century, so fully the cancer and the heart disease. This is the generation that pulled it all in. And they got older, and guess what they ended up doing? They hit this new medical tsunami called Alzheimer's disease. So many of them lost their memories. Troubles galore for a certain generation who were born probably in the 20s, and most of them have passed on by now. There aren't many of the wounded or greatest generation left today. And yet they raised great kids. They loved their families. They blessed their grandchildren. And we inherited something from that generation. They had bravery, they had perseverance. And sometimes out of woundedness comes greatness. When I was fresh out of college, that was a long time ago, as now you know, I worked for a center at Harvard Law School. It was a criminal research center, and they were looking in particular at youth at that point. And they had previously done a big study on kids in detention centers, and they found out something which kind of surprised them. You think of kids as all kind of being involved in the same activities. They're all in sports. You know, they were all in scouts. They've all gotten some music along the way. Turned out the kids in detention centers had done none of those typical youth activities. Almost none of them had done almost no regular youth activities that we think every kid does. So they went back and they said, well, let's have a study. This is the one I got to be involved in. Let's go to the organizations in 2 towns on the outskirts of Boston, and different towns, different, you know, as they call it, socioeconomic status kind of issues in both, and ask the people who are the adult leaders of organizations working with youth, what's going on, how are things going, and lots of questions we got to ask them. And actually, I don't quite know what happened to that study. I wanted to go back because I missed something, because I'm way off the script here. What they were thinking about was that there was trouble for these kids, trouble with a capital T, like the musical, right? The Music Man musical. So the guy comes to town, he's going to sell fake instruments to kids because they're going to be in trouble. And why are they going to be in trouble with a capital T? Because, there's this new pool hall in town, and the kids need something more wholesome to activate them and to, you know, keep them out of trouble. Band instruments, only he doesn't have any instruments, and he doesn't actually know how to play instruments, so he's actually the big trouble. But anyway, the Harvard study follow-up had a funny thing happen. I don't know what their final results were, but I do know that while I was doing this study, it was 1981, and something about 1981 you may remember. Some of you, not all of you. We had a Republican president, and we had a very conservative governor in Massachusetts. This was happening, of course, in the Boston area. Both of those state and federal governments were slashing programs, kind of on the style of what you saw, a year plus ago. You don't remember it now, but this is an old playbook. Taking all kinds of money away from all kinds of different programs. And one of the first and easiest programs to hit, it turns out, is youth programs. Who cares? Who knows? Who sees it, right? So when we happened, out of a different set of circumstances, to land on the doors of a whole bunch of youth organizations, all they wanted to talk about was the trouble they could see because their funding had been cut. Their funding had been cut from the state government and from the federal government, and they didn't know how they were going to be able to serve these kids. So that's my biggest takeaway of that time, was listening to all these adults being worried about trouble at a time that it could have been prevented. Bad trouble of cutbacks. When Representative Lewis spoke of getting into good trouble, he said that in 2018. Now, he wasn't talking about that moment in time per se. He was looking back to his life of getting into good trouble, and he said it started in 1963. And of course, many of you know he suffered violence getting into some good trouble for civil rights. He said, it didn't just start now when he was talking in 2018. It didn't just start in 1963. He said, for this country, it started in 1776. We've been getting in good trouble since then. So today, it is 250 years of getting into good trouble as the people that we are here. And good trouble is not over for us yet. No, we have work to do in order to help the world to be less troubled. And that's the point of getting into good trouble. You want to make sure that there is some relief for those who have so many troubles. I recently read a novel called The Correspondent, kind of an odd novel. It's by Virginia Evans. In it, there's a main character named Sybil, and you get to go through various things she's written. And she's written a note about her life of troubles. Who doesn't have a life of troubles, I say? She says this, I have found it to be absolutely astounding, all the trouble living has turned out to be, things nobody ever warned me about. I wish someone would have thought to say to me earlier on, Sybil, over and over again, serpents will emerge from the bottom of the sea and grab you by the feet. It was such an image, I had to save it. Oh my goodness. Congregations like this one, they seem to me to be particularly well poised in our troubled world to get into good trouble or any kind of whatever work we do to help others experience less trouble. Well, that includes the social justice part of what we do, as well as the compassionate service part of what we do. We are there to help alleviate hunger, to assist with housing, to help in various ways to address the many troubles that people have personally, to knock those serpents off their feet. That's what I see it. That's my image. That's what congregations are doing. They're knocking those serpents that are pulling us all down off the feet, just a little something to try to help against the troubles. Troubles are not just out there. Of course, we experience troubles. All of us experience troubles, whether it's illness, divorce, death, job loss, relationship problems, mental health issues. So many different ways that we personally, all of us, experience troubles. And the congregation can be here for everyone, for all those very personal troubles that we all go through. Last week I was in a different congregation, and a woman got up in the time of joys and sorrows and witnessed to something that I don't think anybody in the congregation had understood. 2 years prior, she had been in a terrible accident and had really struggled to recover. And when she was partly recovered, she began to think that and she hadn't actually been a regular attender of church for several years at that point. Previously, she had been, but she had been a lapsed Unitarian Universalist. You know there are such things? And she came to the point in her journey of health and recovery, and she said, I know what I can do. Once a week, I can go to church. They will accept where I am. It's a a calm place. I will have, something, a routine. It was a brain injury. I will have a routine I can go through. It will be a healing spot. And she said it was the hugest part of her recovery. Now, she didn't tell anybody, and people just were happy to see her and said hello. Nobody did anything, I don't think, out of the ordinary or extraordinary. It was simply holding the space. We hold this space, this incredible space of community. It won't be here unless we are here. And that was what she was trying to lift up for us. Be there, because somebody's going to walk in and they are going to be healed.
Yeah, hold on, let me just leave.
They are going to be healed. Are we okay? They are going to be healed by being among us. And anyway, that was that piece. I remember years ago knowing a woman who was trying for the first time a 12-step program. She was a very religious woman. She wasn't in my congregation. She was Episcopal. But she went to a adult children of alcoholics. And she came out of it and she said to me, that was the most religious experience I have been through. So much more so than my church. And I was kind of surprised, but it made sense. We aspire to be community. We don't always do it. We try. That's the best we can do. We keep showing up. That's what is part of it. She understood that. She didn't stop being a churchgoer. She added something else to it. I hope that she brought that new understanding of how to really support each other better to her church life, because we all need to support each other. In 1948, Mahatma Gandhi said, "Whenever you are in doubt, or when the self becomes too much with you, apply the following test. Recall the face of the poorest and the most vulnerable person whom you may have seen, and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to them. Will they gain anything by it? Will it restore them to a control over their own life and destiny? In other words, will it lead to Swaraj, a Hindu word I don't know, maybe it means something like freedom, for the hungry, for the spiritually in need. Then you will find your doubts and yourself melt away." Gandhi noticed what congregations know, what congregations do, that when we help alleviate the troubles of others, our own troubles melt away. Pretty good deal. Troubles are always with us. They're part of our lives. Even little kids seem to resonate with the idea of being in trouble. I've had some grandkids around me lately. It's a renewal of that kind of the books, the cartoons, the kid movies, and you see all kinds of troublemakers always in them, from, Curious George to Ramona, Dennis the Menace to the Little Rascals, and certainly that troublemaker tops them all in my mind, Cat in the Hat. What a messy person. But we grown-ups could probably take a cue from the kids, embrace trouble in that cultural way, instead of peering into the future and just worrying about all the more trouble that's going to be coming at us. We fear. We are built to fear. Fear helps keep that animal in us safe and alive. Only we're not merely driven by instincts, are we? Our troubles are multiplied in a troubled world, and our fears seem to be burgeoning. It's not new. Odysseus was on an epic journey filled with so many troubles. And Job in the Hebrew Scriptures, well, he's the epitome of personal suffering, a life dominated by trouble. And yet, Odysseus makes it home. Yay. Job yells at God. Boom, boom, boom. He's quite a feisty one. God kind of answers, just enough so that Job ends up being restored, I guess. Not really because he gets his life back, but because he finds faith, the faith that continues, manages, even thrives, despite the troubles that are all around him, despite the troubles that are all around us. We can find a faith that gets us through. The Bible is full of one particular instruction. You might have noticed it. Fear not, be not afraid. Judaism and Christianity are not the only religions with that kind of a wisdom advice. In some sense, in Buddhism, the beginning premise is that life is suffering, and the next thing is that, and you can let go of the suffering. Meditation, whatever. Probably all the religions have their own commentary, their own advice on the troubles that we go through. How can we go through them and still be okay? In 1 John 4:18, there's this wisdom. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Christians also quote scripture that love is stronger than death. And as we can imagine, death is kind of that ultimate trouble that we're all going to face and go through. And maybe this is why we gather religiously, whether as Unitarian Universalists or elsewise. It's not so much ever the specific practices or beliefs. We come together in love. We come together in community. We recognize that troubles are real and many, that fear and suffering does walk among us, but that we are made whole by love. That is the strongest force, stronger even than death. Troubles are no match for love, and that is the good news. Amen.